Well, hello, and welcome back to another exciting edition of Coffee with Stephen. So, this week's blog was going to be about Donald Trump's pick for the Supreme Court, Judge Brett Kavanaugh. That's unfortunately going to have to wait until next week. This last week, the Department of Justice pulled their administrative law requirements on the definition of an assault rifle. As a result of that, I got a slew of emails over the last few days asking, does this mean that the SB 880 has been curtailed? Does this mean that registration was no longer an issue? So I felt compelled to kind of push this up to the front. Essentially, it doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot, to be absolutely candid with you, other than it absolutely highlights the tyrannical aspect of what DOJ has been attempting to do. As I've written about before, there is a process in which a rule must go through the Office of Administrative Law, and there must be a time period where individuals are allowed to essentially participate in the rulemaking process. Now, this is not to be confused with the legislative process. And this is one of the reasons why I have such a sort of a fundamental philosophical issue when it comes to administrative law. The legislature makes laws, and when the legislature makes laws, it requires a political calculation in order to get other legislators to vote for those laws. And that waters down laws, and that's an important thing because, as our founding fathers knew, every single time a law is crafted, by definition, that is a limitation on freedom. Now, some laws are absolutely necessary, and if the political will exists to promulgate a law, so be it. But if the political will does not exist, a less intrusive law comes out of the crucible of the legislature. That's a good thing because that does the most to preserve individual liberty. What's happened is that the Department of Justice, an executive branch of government, has essentially taken on the auspice of developing its own law. And usually this is directly at the behest of the legislature. They can't get the laws passed that they want, so they rely on the executive agency to effectively come up with a more stringent law in their own self. Well, in order to kind of deal with this, there's this Office of Administrative Law. And there's a methodology called file and print. Essentially, if the rule that's being promulgated does not expand any legislative definitions, then it can just basically be thrown in and printed out and everything's fine. If it does go beyond that, then there has to be this public comment period. Well, DOJ sought to develop these administrative rules and use the file and print methodology with the Office of Administrative Law, which is interesting because OAL had originally denied them the opportunity to do it. In fact, this happened 3 times. On the 3rd time, it was the charm, and then they just pulled it again. Now, what does this ultimately mean for us as gun owners? Not a whole heck, to tell you the honest truth. SB 880 is still in force. The penal code has still been modified. What actually defines an assault rifle does remain in flux, but there are certain bright line rules. We absolutely know that if it's a center fire, semi-automatic firearm that has a detachable magazine and it has one or more evil features, protruding pistol grip, collapsible stock, flash suppressor, vertical pistol grip forward of the magazine well, those are the types of things that absolutely are going to define an assault rifle. Whether or not DOJ's administrative law can be used as guidance in prosecution, that remains to be seen. Now, I know this is somewhat wonky, and I don't mean to bore people with it, but it's an important victory for the forces of freedom against the forces of tyranny. And whenever that happens, we have to highlight it. So anyways, I hope you enjoy the blog. As always, if you have any questions or comments, email me at stephen@artemishq.com. And as always, train constantly, train consistently, train with purpose. And above all else, stay vigilant. Until next week, we have coffee together, and hopefully we get to talk about Justice Kavanaugh. Stay safe.